Well, good morning and good afternoon to all of you who are joining us today for Jennifer Wolf's doctoral defense. I'm going to allow her to do her introduction in just a moment, but I just wanted to welcome you all and share that I am Dr. Shonda Schrader. I've had the absolute privilege of advising Jennifer through her doctoral work, but also learning from her about all of these different communication strategies and how to do effective Indigenous health communication. So it's been an absolute privilege and joy for me to learn from her as well. The format for today is that we will be listening to Jennifer share her work with you. And afterwards, her presentation of work should be roughly 45 to 50 minutes. And then we will open for Q&A from her committee members, after which time, if there are additional questions from the community, we will open to you all for questions as well. So it should be about 1 hour of your time, and I will allow Jennifer to do the full introduction as well as to share with you who the members of her doctoral committee are. So without further ado, Jennifer, please share your work with us.
Yeah, Bujin and Dinaway Maganadug. Greetings, relatives. Jennifer Wolf, Nindishnikaz. My name is Jennifer Wolf. Ishkwe Gijagukwe Nindigo Ajibamag. My spirit is known as Edge of Sky Woman. I'm named after my grandfather, Dave Carafel. So if that whole big long name is hard for you to remember, you can always shorten it and just call me Dave. So West Waganing, Ishkonagoning Nindunjiba. I'm an enrolled member of the Ponca tribe of Oklahoma, but identify also with my Ojibwa side from Lac du Flambeau, Wisconsin, which I consider home. And I'm also Santee Dakota for spice. Wabasheshi Nindudum, I'm Martin clan. Technically, I'm clanless, but our family matriarch, Alice Elizabeth Carafel, first of her name, was Martin clan, and I'm as feisty Martin as they come. And then I'm also Gibbswater clan on my Ponca side. You heard from Dr. Schrader. She is my advisor. I'm also pleased to welcome Dr. Dan Henry, who is a committee member, Dr. Pamela Kalflesh, who is also a committee member, and Nicole Reed, MPH, who is an honored member. I am very honored to have on my committee as well. So the subject of my dissertation is the Zaasijiwan, an indigenized health communication framework. It's named after the Ojibwa Moan word meaning it ripples, to honor the way that information spreads from individuals to communities like a pebble in the water, or like a river with contributaries. This framework addresses the critical need for culturally grounded health messaging that honors Indigenous knowledge systems while effectively communicating vital health information. And this framework is meant to be a tool co-designed with health communicators who work with Native people across the country. So in research, it's becoming more common to first share your positionality or frame who you are and how that shapes the study. What biases do you have? And why do you care about this so much? So anyone in my cohort has seen my turtle shell positionality graphic, but today I want to share with you another symbol of who I am. This beaded belt, which was a gift from my biological father, Bill Pensino, when he was still alive. This story tells it in a way that words sometimes can't. So this belt shows that while my grandparents endured trauma of boarding school, including nuns that ripped out the traditional adornments out of my Ponca grandmother's hair on her first day of school, or threatened to boil the hands of my Dakota grandmother in butter if she was caught speaking her language. They didn't strip away our cultural pride. One out of four of my grandparents actually had a decent time in boarding school and graduated salutatorian, but he still grew up in an era where practicing his religion and cultural traditions was illegal. Native and cultural religious practices were effectively illegal in the United States until the passage of the American Indian Religious Freedom Act in 1978. Prior to this, the Department of Interior, through the Code of Indian Offenses of 1883 and subsequent regulations, prohibited many traditional practices, including ceremonies, dances, and the use of sacred objects. Still, after returning home from his service in World War II, he joined the powwow circle, as did all of his children and eventually me. This belt was the first piece of regalia that was made just for me, and it's one of my most cherished belongings, and it's a symbol of our cultural resilience. I'm proud enrolled member of the Ponca tribe of Oklahoma, and two of my two sons are as well. But my identity is also shaped by my Ojibwa roots, represented here by a birch bark canoe gliding across a Northwood sunset, a place where I spent summers and parts of my childhood. My sons have Ojibwamoan names, Mazanaigan and Nawagabu, and when I dream, I'm in Wisconsin. You'll see the geometric lines of the Colorado Mountains, and I live there now, and that's part of the design honors the plain style artistry of my Santee, Dakota, and Ponca lineage. And the two eagles beaded into this work, one for each of my brothers, Wamblee and Migizi, whose names both mean eagle in Lakota and Ojibwamoan. The red birds represent my sisters, Redwing, and a space for my youngest sister, Ida Alice, who wasn't born when this was made, but was already a part of who I am. This belt doesn't just tell where I'm from, it also reflects the privileges I've had. My mom, Sally Carefield Williams, good sky woman, and chosen father, Richard Williams, long-legged bison, raised me in a home free from substance abuse with economic stability, and they and my grandparents valued our culture. Because of them, these gifts have survived 40 plus years without being lost, pawned, or broken. They taught me that our gifts and our stories matter, and that I matter too. My Americanized name is written in the Latin alphabet used in Western cultures, in most Western cultures. And that's part of the story too, because I was raised in the US public school system and trained as a scientist. I worked as a chemist for the FDA and the United Tribe, and later as a public health consultant. So as I share this framework, I carry with me what's known as a two-eyed seeing perspective, honoring both Indigenous and Western ways of knowing. I've lived in reservation, rural, and urban Native spaces, and I see this work not just as scholarship, but as a responsibility to reflect our strength, our humor, and our values as we communicate how health to our people. So that's who I am. But why do I care? Why does any of this matter? The effects of colonization have impacted American Indian Alaska Native people for 500 years, creating deep-seated mistrust in healthcare systems. For this presentation and in my dissertation, I may use the term American Indian and Alaska Native formally or Native informally. Native is a term commonly used in American Indian Alaska Native communities, but distinct from Indigenous, which can imply people from pre-colonial contexts anywhere in the world. So sometimes I use the word Indigenous or Indigenized for concepts and meanings that pertain to Indigenous people broadly, but are being applied specifically for this research. For example, Indigenous people across the world need their own health communication frameworks for similar reasons, but I'm developing one for American Indian Alaska Native people because those are the people I primarily serve as a consultant and soon to be school administrator. Across the US, 15% of Native people report experiencing racial discrimination when visiting medical facilities, with 23% avoiding care altogether because they're concerned about discrimination. This mistrust extends to health messaging that fails to reflect Native perspectives and strengths. Current health communication approaches often rely on Western models that overlook Native knowledge systems and community-driven decision-making. The Zaasijiwan framework addresses these gaps by centering Native voices and cultural assets in the development of health messages for communities from within to help communication strategies resonate with audiences with the hope of ultimately impacting health outcomes. The other reason this framework is important is because my consulting team and my colleagues in public health communications who inform this framework, we're really good at what we do, to be honest, but we can't do it all. During the pandemic, I was observing what communities were doing to let their people know within their reservation or their urban Native settings, and reminding folks that protecting one another is why we're still here after 500 years of violence and oppression. My team was working 60 to 80 hours doing strengths-based communication strategies for various clients. And eventually we put on webinars through First Nations Development Institute, Native Voices Rising, or we co-led one with Seven Directions. And sometimes 60 to 90 tribes and Native-led organizations would be on these webinars to learn what they could about health communication. But shortly after each webinar, the emails and the calls would start rolling in. Could we do their strategy for them? Well, no, we always do strategies with our clients. And I started hoping that I had a tool to guide them to build their own capacity and confidence, either creating their own strategy step by step, or as a teaching tool to get them up to speed for when we did work together. Something straightforward and empowering. But I wanted to do it right, not just my ideas. The research process that I used for this study follows like a water cycle metaphor, reflecting the interconnected and cyclical nature of knowledge generation in Native communities. First of all, we have the cloud formation. If you look in the center of this graphic, is the literature review. What information is already out there? I reviewed Western health communication theories, Native health communication practices to identify gaps and strengths that would guide this framework's development. And then the next step is transpiration down by those trees. It involved the first round of key informant interviews, like water rising through plant roots. Insights from health communicators who work with Native communities were drawn up into the study, surfacing community-informed strategies, cultural considerations, barriers. And then up by the sun there in the corner, evaporation is the synthesis of those themes from both the literature and the interviews. Here, patterns and gaps began to emerge, forming the early substance of the framework. And then condensation, which is where those insights were shaped into the draft framework, the structure starting to form, but still awaiting further validation. Step 5 is precipitation. That's the second round of interviews, where participants reviewed the draft and provided critical feedback to refine the framework. And then step 6 was percolation, where this reflects the refinement process. We integrated the feedback, like water soaking into the ground, filtering ideas to strengthen cultural fit and clarity. Step 7 is the water storage and waterways step, and that marked the finalization of the framework, basically where we are now. A coherent model is now ready to be used with health communication professionals and tribal partners. And then where are we going? That's step 8, confluence. The dissemination phase, getting this knowledge back out there where the information from the framework flows outward to communities and stakeholders, supporting culturally grounded health messages rooted in Native knowledge systems. So, as I mentioned, first step, literature review. Our department is super fortunate to have a strong relationship with our university research librarian, Devin Olson. Not only does Devin regularly guest lecture for our department to teach us about literature searches, things like Boolean operators and mesh terms, blah, 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 things that I never thought I'd need after my master's, but she somehow made them interesting again. But she also curates journals and databases specifically for Indigenous health, nationally and globally. So my focus is on American Indian Alaska Native people. And so I felt like starting with the Native Health database was a good place to begin my search. So keywords were used without combinations for Native people, like I normally would do. And like PubMed, you're looking for American Indians and health communication. Because this was a database about Native people, I correctly assumed that the majority of articles pertained to Native people. But some were about the First Nations people of Canada, and those were excluded. Still, the Native specific resources contain dozens of articles, not thousands like PubMed and Google Scholar. So for these Native specific resources, I went back to 2005 instead of 2015. The American Indian and Alaska Native Mental Health Research Journal was a jackpot of information, but there wasn't an easy way to search by topic. So I just intended to scan the articles and do like the Control F or auto search thing in a PDF document for the word communication, for example. However, often I'd intend to scan the article and then I'd find it was an hour later and I had read the whole darn thing. So, there were just so many amazing articles in this journal. There were some articles that didn't necessarily have to do with communication per se that I might have missed if had I not just read pretty much all of them, because it wasn't purely about sending out information. It was about developing messages, whether they called it messages or not, in conjunction with doing actions through interventions, or sometimes the evaluation of that intervention. But the researchers were still considering what to say with the do. So health communication is sometimes called health promotion, such as a health community health worker giving information to teens about sexual health. There's a lot of overlap as they need to consider what to say, how to say it, and who is best to deliver the message. Do they have a brochure? How is it designed? Health promotion interventions often include health communication, even if they don't call it that. So, like I said, the identical search process and keyword combination was used in PubMed and Google Scholar to ensure consistency across those broader databases. By the time I got to Google Scholar, the same articles were showing up again and again from the other three sources. So that indicated saturation. So what did I find? Community participation stood out as foundational in the lit findings. When Native communities are involved with designing health messages, there's greater cultural resonance, a stronger sense of ownership, which improves trust and uptake. In our Indigenous Health PhD program, we have an entire class in our program just dedicated to community or tribally based participatory methods. So this really wasn't a big surprise. But eventually it dawned on me how communities connected conceptually to all the other things I was finding. Messenger selection was also emphasized. Trusted messengers, especially elders, family members like aunties, respected community leaders, have a powerful influence on how messages are received and whether they lead to behavior change. And like some of the other things we learned, sometimes the teens want to hear certain types of information from other teens. So, see who is giving the message definitely matters, as does cultural homophily. This was a new term to me before I started this research program. And homophily is when people see their identity reflected. When people see their own cultural experiences and identities represented in messages, they're more likely to trust and act on that information. This one is a critical factor in how natives perceive authenticity in messaging. Is the tone too stoic, like the crying Indian on the side of the road? Natives have a strong radar for when things are too corny or too sacred. They'll definitely be like, who the heck wrote this? So a strengths-based approach is more effective than deficit framing, highlighting community strengths, cultural resilience, traditional knowledge, increases engagement, and it avoids reinforcing harmful stereotypes. Again, we are so sick of hearing like we're last in every health race, like we're all going to die of diabetes and all these things. Things need to be empowering so we feel like what we do to change things is actually going to matter. But again, this is a thin line to walk between emphasizing strengths and sounding too, beads and feathers, warrior up on the hill. All of these aspects of good communication strategies are tied back with working with the community itself. What does the community pride itself on? For example, when working on a COVID-19 campaign, I learned that the Ute people consider aspen trees as sacred. So my team used an aspen grove as a metaphor on how a family of trees can stay connected even when socially distanced, because our roots tie a community together. So dissemination strategies must meet communities where they are. Social media was frequently identified as a vital tool, especially for youth and urban natives, but challenges with broadband in rural areas remains a barrier. Finally, relational connections, messages that frame behaviors as protecting loved ones, community, or cultural continuity were more impactful than those focused solely on individual health outcomes. So all of these factors reinforce that we need to understand how our communities are different. A Western approach to suicide prevention or substance abuse might recommend that someone at risk should not seek help because of others. You can only do these things for yourself. For natives, however, we mostly are motivated by our desire for healthy families and communities, as evidenced by successful COVID-19 campaigns encouraging natives to mask up or socially distance to protect their elders. Many tribes ascribe to the 7 generations mindset, believing that what we do now affects 7 generations into the future. We see the natural world as being related to us and feel responsible. These connections, strengths, and values must be leveraged in health communication to Native people. So these findings informed both the framework's core elements and how it is intended to be used in practice. So then we get to the key informants. The really fun stuff was the conversations that I had with so many experts across the country. Participation in the study was not limited by an individual's native identity, but by their professional expertise. There are non-natives who create messages for tribal and urban native communities and have lots of experience doing so, even from their mistakes. Participants had to be 18 years or older, and no exclusions were made based on gender or sexual orientation. And this is my field of work. So I reached out to thought leaders who I've worked with and then did some snowball sampling. And Nicole Reed had some excellent suggestions too. And it didn't take long to start hearing the same names over and over because we all know each other. So we ended up with 8 who were available to meet within my time frame via Zoom. And I went with one-on-one conversations rather than focus groups so that people would share freely and also to honor everyone's busy schedules. We're all working professionals. So let me just say I ended up with the superstars in the field from Johns Hopkins Center for Indigenous Health, Northwest Portland area Indian Health Boards, We Are Native, Centers for American Indian Alaska Native Health, tribal communication specialists from coast to coast, consultants like Raven Collective, Turtle Island Media Group, researchers. My dissertation is stacked with the wise and generous people who care about what they do for Native people and communities. So at the bottom of this, you'll see a word cloud and a tree map, but don't strain your eyes. This is just to let you know I did these things. So I used In Vivo, which is a software for qualitative analysis to help me keep track of the themes from the interview transcripts. And then I rearranged them and consolidated them. And then I went back a second time through the interview transcripts to make sure I didn't miss anything. So from there, we ended up with the draft framework. From the synthesis of the literature review and the first round of interviews, I put together all what I learned into one graphic that summarized themes in a visual way. See, health communication communicators themselves are use graphics such as social media. They might use a PowerPoint slide that needs to quickly convey points, or develop a brochure, a flyer, or you've all seen like the posters in the medical exam rooms. So it made sense that the framework should share ideas in a way that health communicators themselves deliver information visually. So I'm not going to go into complete depth of each of these elements, as many of them ended up in the final draft, which I'll cover in detail a little later. But just to kind of run through in broad strokes, it included community-based processes. As I mentioned, the lit and the informants emphasized the message development must begin with community engagement and co-creation. We need to consider dissemination, how our health message is shared. Dissemination should consider preferences and accessibility across age groups, rural and urban contexts. Barriers, these include staff capacity, funding, even the approval process to get a message greenlit by a funder. Evaluation, informants emphasize that evaluation should be built into health communication strategies, not as a compliance step, but as a culturally grounded practice of reflection, learning, and accountability to the community. And it should include space for community feedback, story-based evaluation, and adaptation over time. I talked a little bit about homophily from the lit search. Seeing oneself reflected in the message through language, visuals, or in messengers was repeatedly mentioned as essential. Connections and relational ties, messages that evoke a why rooted in the who, such as protecting an elder or a child, were often seen as most effective, and cultural assets as strengths. Humors, values like respect, bravery, Indigenous language, and ways of knowing were all considered assets that should be centered. So then I showed that graphic that I just showed you to my key informants. And we went through each element in the second round of interviews, and 2 of my original informants were able to meet again, but 2 others who I was able to connect with for the first time were available to review the draft with me. So again, I ended up with 8 key informants. So the participants were given the background on the purpose of this study if they hadn't heard that the first time. And then they were shown that water cycle graphic that I showed you before, so they would know how the draft framework came to be. And then we went from there and went through every aspect of the framework and asked for their assessment on the cultural relevance and adaptability from tribe to tribe, from reservation to urban settings, from academia to private consulting. Is this framework understandable and usable? So the participants validated the core elements while offering suggestions to enhance clarity, cultural relevance, practical applicability. But it was overall very reassuring that folks were excited about it. They can see themselves using it, and they had really great insights on how to improve it. One informant noted, this framework uses language to articulate what we've been doing intuitively in our communities. So it's really important for me to adhere to the responsibilities of good data sovereignty. I wanted to make sure that the quotes that I was using reflected what everyone meant to say. I used these second interviews to conduct member checking to ensure the framework was what and what I heard them say accurately reflected their experiences and what they meant to say. So I read them their quotes that I used directly in the dissertation. And were they accurate in my interpretation of them? Did they see their voice in the final or in the draft framework, and what would make it better still? And what did I miss the mark on? The same process was used to do the thematic analysis as the first round. I did a word cloud to start identifying common words and terms, coded the transcripts, developed a code book, went back again to make sure I didn't miss anything or incorrectly code a theme. So based on this feedback, the framework was revised to include clear visual representation, more accessible language so that someone inexperienced with health communication could understand it, and also some additional elements were added. The participants validated the draft framework's course concepts while offering suggestions to enhance its clarity, cultural relevance, and practical applicability. Recommendations for design were plentiful. So, because some of the informants are professional graphic designers as well as health communicators, so they were very honest with me, and which I really appreciate. I actually received better feedback on that water cycle graphic I showed you earlier with the data collection process, with the different stages of like precipitation and all that stuff, than I did on the actual draft framework. So, some people were like, make it look more like that. So based on that feedback, I also needed revisions to the reading level or literacy, and using some terms like dissemination, evaluation, homophily, and even the word research was felt to be too academic and intimidating for a tool that should be able to be used by novice health communicators, somebody who just got thrown into that role. And then there were also recommendations for what was missing from the current framework, including a description of evaluation that's accessible and culturally grounded so that it's crystal clear. There's no need to hire an outside evaluator. We tell our own stories. So, but there was also a need to include resources as a balance to barriers. So the framework should prompt users to consider their internal resources, like, does your tribe have a good graphic designer that people recognize their style and their work? One informant also suggested that if this framework eventually becomes a printed workbook or like an activity book with activities for each section of the framework, or an online tool training tool, that a running list of native graphic designers, web designers, and other consultants should be included as an appendix or a hard copy toolkit that somehow is linked in the online version. So if they don't have those type of folks within their communities, they have some direction on where to look. So there was also some salient insights that didn't fit into either the other two broader themes that I wanted to capture them anyway, such as artificial intelligence. One informant stated, if I were to go into Canva's AI tool and type in Native American, I can almost guarantee it will be something very sterile, stereotypical, and offensive, such as this guy who was created in ChatGPT when I asked for an image of a Native American public health communicator creating a strategy. Notice he's alone. He's not getting any community input. And notice he's wearing a war bonnet to work. So, there's AI has a lot to learn about us as a contemporary people. So the other thing on everyone's mind is politics. One of the informants said, get this framework up online in as many places as possible, as fast as possible, especially with this federal government. It feels like websites are being taken down more and more. So based on all of this feedback I received, the framework was revised to include clear visual design, additional elements to address identified gaps. So again, don't strain your eyes. We're going to go through. This is just to show you like how it all looks together. The framework emphasizes that effective health communication ripples not just from person to family to community, but the process itself is a flow of information, gathering from tributaries, requiring ongoing engagement, reflection, adaptation, and each element builds upon the others, creating a holistic approach that honors the complexity of Indigenous health communication. So I'm going to break down each of these elements. So again, don't hurt your eyes. So after the purpose of the framework is stated, the first element is community, which serves as headwaters from which ideas flow and then expert information contributes. It represents the origin and the continual touch point for strategy development, ensuring that all health communications efforts are grounded in community knowledge and values. Next, we develop a strategy by understanding the landscape and the strategy and the goals. The resources and barrier step prompts framework users to identify the conditions and challenges of the community. The beaver dam metaphor reflects the Indigenous understanding of nature as purposeful and adaptive rather than solely obstructive. The evaluation was edited to be called goal setting. This language prompts users to define success in the way that they feel is best. They can decide whether they want to assess changes in the health outcome or measure the activities of the strategy, or whether there's simply buzz in the community about the strategy. Are you hearing about, the meme you posted about this on social media from your cousin? And they don't even know that you're the one who did it. So as one informant stressed, encouraging communities to develop components of their strategy and define its success honors Native self-determination and sovereignty. The sharing of stories steps invites users to think intentionally about trusted messengers best suited for strategy, whether that's elders, youth, artists, or community leaders. Furthermore, this step prompts users to choose dissemination methods without using a term that felt overly formal or academic by my key informant participants. Likewise, homophily is replaced with reflection. It encourages users to think critically about whether the message feels like it originates from and belongs to the community. Connections. In this metaphor, the wind represents a health message, a force intended to create movement and change, and the waves symbolize community or family members who are connected and responsive to one another. When a message or the wind is aligned with what people care about, it sets the waves in motion together, strengthening collective impact. And informants agreed that in many Native communities, health decisions are rarely made in isolation and are often motivated by a sense of protection, responsibility, or love for others. This framework element honors those motivations so that a movement toward healthier behavior is shared and leveraged. And then we have cultural assets. Participants emphasize that culture is not just a context, it's fundamental, it's a driving force. Many of these elements are interconnected, and this one is tied to almost all others. For example, messages that reflect community identity should be grounded in strengths such as resilience, sovereignty, connections. Culture can nourish and support the content, much like trees can strengthen the shores and mountains and feed tributaries. And then this closing element reinforces the foundational purpose of the Zaasijiwan framework. Every communication strategy is part of a larger web of respect, relationships, and responsibilities. One drop can cause a ripple that extends from individuals to families to communities and potentially across Indian country. So let's talk about how this framework can be used. practically. The Zaasijiwan framework can be applied across various settings and health topics, from chronic disease preventions to maternal health, mental wellness to emergency preparedness. It provides flexible structure that can be adapted to different community contexts while maintaining core principles of cultural relevance and community engagement. By following this framework, step by step, organizations can develop health communication strategies that honor sovereignty, build trust, and effectively engage Native audiences. This approach moves beyond simply translating mainstream messages to truly indigenizing health communication from the ground up. The Zaasijiwan framework offers a practical tool for improving health communication, especially in Native communities. It supports Native-led research and can guide public health professionals, funders, and educators in building respectful, ethical partnerships. For non-Native users, it encourages humility, co-learning, and a deeper understanding of Indigenous values and relationships. Personally, I will use it to onboard clients, which is similar to feedback I receive from my informants. I'm on the applied track, so of course I center practical uses of the framework, but the next slide describes some of the possible academic directions of this framework. So looking ahead, there are several opportunities to expand this work and explore the framework's impact. First, testing the framework in practice is critical. Piloting it with tribal or urban Indian organizations will help assess how usable, relevant, and adaptable it is in real-world settings. Adaptation studies can help us understand how communities modify the framework to align with local governance, languages, cultural teachings. These insights would guide future iterations and support broader implementation. Effectiveness evaluation is another priority. Future studies could measure how the framework influences outcomes like message resonance, behavioral intent, community engagement, or perceived cultural alignment. There's also an opportunity to explore the framework as a teaching or mentorship tool, especially for Native youth, tribal college students, or early career Indigenous health professionals. It could help them develop culturally grounded communication strategies and build skills in health messaging. If we could also pursue manuscripts and journals like the American Indian Alaska Native Mental Health Journal, Health Promotion Practice, Progress in Community Health Partnerships. And finally, I'd like to seek opportunities to present this work at conferences like ACES, NIHB, APHA, and the International Indigenous Research Conference. These future steps will help bring the Zaasijiwan framework to a broader audience and ensure it continues to evolve in community-driven ways. The framework has potential to transform how health information is communicated in Native communities, ultimately contributing to the improved health outcomes and reduced health disparities. May it serve as a resource, a reflection, and a reminder that our ways of knowing carry power, our stories matter, and when magnified by the impact of community, our thoughts and words can ripple far beyond what we can see. So it's hard to admit this, but this dissertation was partially written by AI, ancestor Indians. My ancestors spoke to me in dreams, guided this work. Often I'd wake up between 2 or 3 in the morning with a clear vision and description of the data collection process, the framework itself and its elements. The water metaphors described throughout are not my own. They came from messages from elsewhere, and I know my grandparents in particular are cheering me on from above. I feel it in my blood. Their names are listed here. The greatest gifts of my life, my sons, have sacrificed the most for this doctoral program. There's nothing I have done or will do that compares to being a mom of the 2 most beautiful humans I know. I already travel extensively for work, and suddenly their mom was absent at sporting events, music performances, and at the dinner table. Excuse me. But I didn't even have to ask. I knew they cheered me on, like I did for every lacrosse goal, tennis match, music performance, and honor roll. However, my mother, biological father, and chosen father are all educators and taught me that learning is a lifelong journey and the path of the modern day warrior among us. My brothers, sisters, nieces and nephews, aunties, uncles are all part of the same resilient tree. Though we fight for our people in different ways. They should all have PhDs in what they do, whether it's writing hit TV shows, working to rematriate bison, supporting nonprofits, helping tribal clinics navigate the 638 self-determination process, work with plant medicines, marching for Native rights, studying therapy after surviving a lifetime of struggles, or teaching cosmetology to incarcerated youth. I'm proud of them all. This dissertation would not have been possible without key informants who generously shared their knowledge. I hope I made them proud, and we can continue shaping this work together. Thanks to my committee who believed in me enough to offer their time and wisdom. In particular, my advisor, Dr. Shonda Schrader, who vibed with my ideas from day one. And the work of Nicole Reed and Dr. Pamela Kalflesh often were cited during my academic journey, and I was honored that they agreed to be on my committee. And Dr. Henry provided a deeper linguistic understanding of the metaphor of my title when I took his class, and I knew he'd keep me on track with the two-eyed lens specific to Ojibwa ways of knowing. So many to thank: my clients, cohorts, colleagues, friends, my professors, the department staff, guest speakers, my dog Beatrice, and even my ex-husband, Jason, who I saw is on the line. Thank you too. Also my blended family members, Matthew, Lydia, and Violet, who gave me fresh energy I needed to cross the finish line. This dissertation is not just my work. It reflects every conversation, sacrifice, lesson, and encouragement I received along the way. I offered in humility and with the hope that it will honor those who come before me and help others down the road. Miigwech to all who walked with me. That's it.
You say that's it as if you haven't just shared something absolutely amazing with all of us. That was fabulous, Jennifer, and we thank you for sharing. I encourage you all to stay on for the question and answer because the committee members are not the only ones that we'll open to questions from. So we will each ask a few questions, but then we would love to hear from you all as well. So because I'm already off mute, I am going to start. And full disclosure, I'm a non-Indigenous aspiring ally and methodologist. So my question is going to come from a methodological lens. And I'm going to just say, if you had to do another study, you alluded to this a little bit in your call for future work. What would be your next or ideal change to what you already did? Either one. What would be your next study using the same work?
I think I would probably test it with a real campaign and ideally have a community who knows nothing about health communication use it first and then see if they thought that it was helpful.
So would that be qualitative work, quantitative work, a little bit of a mixed method?
I think it'd be a little bit of a mixed method. You know, honestly, one of the things that propelled me into this work was during the pandemic. I, like everyone else, was tracking all the epidemiological data that was coming out of Johns Hopkins, seeing where the hotspots were. And then I was also on social media because we didn't have anything else to do. And I started seeing different tribal communities were doing an amazing job with their health communications. The Salt River, Pima, Maricopa Indian community, the Southern Ute Indian tribe were very strategic in what they were putting out. That, their messages are, we're in this together, but then some other underlying needs that the community had to stay connected. Some of them were going out to the homes of the elders to make sure they weren't alone. And while they were there, they were having them share their cultural knowledge, whether it was a story from their community or a ribbon skirt making tutorial or a fry bin making tutorial. They were making their elders feel like they weren't alone and that their knowledge was valuable. And when I was looking at the epi data for the Salt River, Pima, Maricopa community, it was like a island of blue in a sea of red because they're down in Arizona where, there's a lot of anti-vaxxers and whatnot. And they were publishing their own epi data too. How many tribal members had COVID? How many tribal members that lived off the reservation had COVID? And I just thought it was really fascinating. So, I wanted this to be more of a forward thinking research for what do we do next time? Because as I mentioned, my team was absolutely overwhelmed with work. We couldn't have possibly done it all. So what tool can I give to folks so that they can do it themselves? Because that whole Salt River thing would have been a really great retrospective study to say, how did these messages make you feel? Did they make you, how did this impact your behavior? So that would be something for way, way down the line, is how these things actually affect the community.
Thank you. So to the other committee members, any questions from you all?
Yeah. Jennifer, you talked about one possible obstacle in that websites are being taken down. What sort of resources do you think you have and other people have for overcoming those obstacles?
Yeah, I think looking for ways to fund activities that aren't tied to federal funding is one way. And, being able to put these type of toolkits on my own private consulting website is one workaround. But yeah, I think we're having to be more creative, and gosh, my consulting projects that had anything to do with DEI, we had to rewrite proposals, rewrite contracts. But we still do the work that's important to us.
Going on the questions, Jennifer, just some comments, because watching your work from the start to this finished product, I just want to thank you for showing the beaded belt and letting us see your foundation, your story, and especially the story of your ancestors through boarding school. But a lot of people don't want to show that vulnerability and stuff, but so thank you for that. The water cycle with your research methodology was a nice touch. And just to reaffirm what was in the chat, giwata minewa gime mai kwe namigom, great job and congrats. And I'll just leave it at that after that. Yeah, that was the first time I've ever seen that. So don't let that don't let that hurt the experience of this, because wonderful job and very appreciative of this work that you've done and what this work is going to mean to the future of not only the indigenous amongst the Mi'kmaq here in Turtle Island, but worldwide, because I believe this framework will go worldwide. So again, Chimigwech.
Thank you, Jennifer. And I would like to open up for any questions you all might have, whether you want to use the chat or just come off mute and talk with us. If you want to share insight, if you want to ask questions, we're open to the community.
Hello, everyone. I'm Donica. I've known Jennifer for 20 years. We worked together at Denver Indian Health, so it's so amazing that we're here at this moment. And I just want to say your ancestors are so proud, and I'm so proud of you. And so my question is more kind of a broader question of I'm also a survivor of the doctoral school. I'm a doctor. But so I think for me, the broader question is I'm wondering for you, because also just amazing, beautiful, beautiful work. I also love the metaphor of the water, and it's not really a metaphor, it's truth, right? This is our knowledge is flowing and moving and connected and all of that. So I just want to appreciate the work that you did, and also the way that you brought your relatives, your ancestors, past, present, and future into this work. It's really, really beautiful and really amazingly done. So congratulations, Dr. Wolf. But my question really is like kind of a broader question of what is the greatest lesson that you learned through the process of Western education, and how does that reflect into your work, in the work that you do and aspire to do moving forward? And hello, Richard Williams. It's good to see you.
Yeah, I would say that one thing I learned in the pandemic and then brought that into my academic journey was that we just do the work that needs to be done. I had at the beginning of the pandemic, I had been applying for a leadership job within the state of Colorado, and I didn't end up getting it, and I was heartbroken. And I thought, and I talked to my cousin, who's a senator in the state of South Dakota, and she's like, "Why are you so disappointed about this?" And I said, "Because I would have, during this pandemic, I would have brought together all of these community partners, tribal and non-tribal, to come up with a communication strategy to make sure that everyone knows that we're all in this together, and then remind them of all these cultural reasons for protecting one another. That's how we've survived 500 years of pandemics, was by protecting each other the best way we know how. And we've always been adaptable people." And she said, "Well, what's stopping you from doing that work?" She said, "Just do the work, and eventually someone's going to pay you." So I did. I started, reaching out to folks within Colorado, and eventually I got hired by the same organization that I didn't get hired to be their leader for, but now I was working for them as a consultant, doing the very work that I wanted to do. And it just went so well. And we worked with the tribes in Colorado and 49 different organizations throughout the state. And so that message of do the work that needs to be done, no matter what other people are telling you, stuck with me through this university process as I submitted my IRB. And the language that I added about tribal data sovereignty and good data governance was getting rejected and causing a holdup in my IRB approval. I tried a bunch of different ways to phrase it. Like, how is this data going to be owned? What sort of control over the words are my stakeholders going to have? And eventually they gave me a paragraph and said, cut and paste this paragraph. This is how it's going to have to be stated. And if you don't, it's never going to get approved. And so I had a tough choice there. And, I decided to cut and paste that paragraph and still stick to my heart, how I was going to go back to all of my key informants and read them word for word what I said that they said, and made sure that I understood it, and gave them the freedom and opportunity to make changes to any of that, even though technically UND owns their words. That sticking to my heart and how I was raised was something that I carried forward. So
Thank you.
yay, I'm glad the AI joke landed how it's supposed to.
Well, I'm going to pause and just say there is time for one more question, but we will respect time. So does anyone else have anything they'd like to say or ask for folks?
Thank
Okay,
you to everyone who came and to listen. And I'm just touched by all of your presence and the contributions. And anyone who wants a copy of the final dissertation, I'm happy to share it, especially my key informants.
Absolutely. Excellent work. Oh, wait, did we have one last comment? Did I saw something? Okay, yes, excellent work. And I will just say it's a beautiful application of your work, Jennifer, and to have witnessed this work from the beginning to the end, and to have watched that model evolve, even the visual elements, the final product, it's not only academically sound and speaks true to the voices of your stakeholders, but it's visually appealing and easy to understand and embrace. So you did an excellent job, and I just thank you for sharing with us today. So thank you all for being here. Thank you for celebrating her work, and stay tuned if you're interested in seeing the publication of it, because she will be sharing it and you'll be able to see this excellent work from top to bottom. So thank you all.
Thank you, everyone. Miigwech. Damia.
Excellent job.
Good job, sis. We love you.
Thank you, Pops. Hi, Mom. Thanks for listening. Those are my awesome parents.
Nice meeting you.
Yeah, nice meeting you. So glad you're here.
It's good to see you, Richard. I'm trying not to fanboy out over here when you popped on. So you're an inspiration to me, and thank you for all the work that you've done. I just want to say that.
You're welcome. And, we just do it because, Creator guides us in a good way. And I love that AI, because that's the truth about, who we are. And we have that spiritual guidance that comes from the past that helps motivate all of us in a good way. So, and thank all of you for supporting my wonderful daughter, and I know my wife's sitting here next to me, and she's just so happy she can't stand it. So thank you all. Talk to you later. See you.
Miigwech, kikawabamen, Minwa.
Okay, so now it's the uncomfortable part where we actually kick you out of the room for a hot minute, but I think I just put you in a discussion room because that is easier than making you leave and come back. So I'm going to stop the recording.